The Child Abuse Royal Commission is today focusing on the man at the top of the Catholic Church in Australia. Cardinal George Pell, who headed the church in Melbourne and Sydney before his recent appointment to the Vatican, is being examined over his role in the church's controversial and aggressive legal approach when defending sex abuse claims. Lawyers have protected the church's millions in complex trusts and insulated the organisation's top office holders from civil cases. But today there's been a major shift in the church's language, raising victims' hopes for fair compensation. Adam Harvey reports.
It's a short walk from Anthony and Chrissy Foster's Sydney hotel to the hearing room of the Royal Commission. They're here because of what a Catholic priest did to two of their daughters more than 2 decades ago.
Emma and Katie attended a Catholic primary school. At that school was a pedophile priest, and he abused them, sexually assaulted them during school hours. I took them to school and I picked them up afterwards to ensure their safety, and yet at the school there was a predator there who was just had his pick of the children at school.
The abuse had a horrendous impact on the girls.
Emma, after an incredible struggle trying to keep her alive and trying to keep her off drugs and trying to keep her away from self-harm, suicided when she was 26. And that was after Katie, when she was 15, was hit by a car and resulted in her having 24-hour care.
Katie's response to the abuse was to binge drink. She'd stepped in front of the car while drunk.
What they need is help to restore their lives as best as possible. What we got from the church was a fight.
The Archbishop of Melbourne at the time was George Pell. The Fosters wanted to tell him what had happened to their children.
It was we felt a very cold-hearted George Pell that met us that day, and we really got nothing out of that except a challenge that if we didn't like what he wanted to give us, then we could take him to court. And we did that.
It was all legalistic. There was no shred of understanding what had happened to Emma or any of the other victims, or to...
There was no visible caring,
compassion.
And there was no connection at all with our plight.
No, none whatsoever.
None.
Nothing.
It's this legalistic approach by the Catholic Church and Cardinal Pell's alleged lack of compassion that's under the microscope this week at the Royal Commission. It's the case of John Ellis.
From about 1974 to 1979, Mr Ellis was sexually abused by Father Duggan while Mr Ellis was an altar boy.
Father Aidan Duggan spent months grooming the 13-year-old boy before he began having sex with him.
Father Duggan gave the whiskey to me in a small glass with some ice. I liked it and it made me feel lightheaded and more relaxed about him touching me.
As with the Foster girls, the abuse had a profound impact on Mr Ellis's life. Andrew Morrison represented John Ellis in his battle with the church.
As a consequence of that abuse, he developed psychological problems which led to the breakdown of his marriage and the loss of his job as a partner in a major firm of solicitors in Sydney.
Mr Ellis asked for $100,000 compensation, but the Archdiocese of Sydney, under Cardinal Pell, took an aggressive legal stance.
They issued a notice to produce documents relating to his divorce and custody dispute in the family court and extensively cross-examined him during the hearing. That cross-examination included challenging him about whether he had been abused at all.
The church won, not because of the personal attacks, but because it successfully argued that its complex legal structure protected it from lawsuits. This has become known as the Ellis defence. It haunts sex abuse victims across the nation to this day.
Most people are very surprised to learn the Catholic Church is not a legal entity that can be sued. You can't sue Catholic organisations in their own name, so unless you can sue an actual office bearer who was in a position of responsibility at that time, there's no defendant to sue.
It's the church saying that it doesn't exist at law, and then also saying that the money that the church holds, which is kept in trusts, that money cannot be accessed by victims.
When they're doing their supposedly good things, they're one giant organisation under one head, the Pope in Rome, but when it comes to having problems with them, they fragment into hundreds of individual organisations that bear no responsibility for what they've done.
Church leaders are free to decide whether to use the Ellis defence to fight sex abuse claims. George Pell's Sydney diocese uses the defence.
In negotiations with the lawyers acting for the church, the Ellis point, in my experience, is invariably taken, and they say, take what we offer or sue and fail.
We have seen George Pell, from day one, use every legal weapon that he thinks he can apply to limit the liability of the church. And that has involved him in the ruthless and repeated application of the Ellis defence in those dioceses where he's in charge.
He saved the Catholic Church in Melbourne and the rest of Australia hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that should have been out there restoring lives of victims. And he's denied that. He personally has had a major role in denying justice to victims, and he should stand accountable for that, and he's off to Rome instead.
It's important that every church leader, whether they're a cardinal or a religious leader, needs to put the victims first and not be concentrating on the assets of the church or protecting it from scandal.
Cardinal Pell now says he's disturbed by elements of his diocese's approach to John Ellis. And today, there are signs the church is backing away from the Ellis defence.
In his statement to the Royal Commission, the Cardinal says, and I quote, "Whatever position was taken by the lawyers during the litigation, my own view is that the Church in Australia should be able to be sued in cases of this kind."
What is very, very important is that every diocese and every religious order make available a legal entity that can be sued, and that legal entity is backed by insurance and wealth.
George Pell is due to appear before the Royal Commission next week.
So it's very important that for us, that we really hear the church interrogated on their basis of relying on the Ellis defence, on why they haven't been compensating victims fully, why they haven't been looking after victims, why they haven't cared.
Adam Harvey reporting.